out from all those profiles we all look at every day. And then finally, Kathy from Presidion is going to join us on the panel discussion. So without listening to me anymore, let me introduce you to Johnny Ryan from toolkit.ie and let him get started.
So, can you hear me? Is my mic on? It's on now. Owen, thank you very much. So what I want to do is I want to set some big-ish picture context in the next 20 minutes. And actually, I've changed my title a little bit. I've changed it to something a little bit more provocative. What I decided is, for me, the theme is, if we're not thinking long-term, we are in trouble. So let's widen the lens quite a bit further than the origins of the net. Let's widen the lens to the beginning and go back 37,000 years. What you're seeing on screen are the Lubombo Mountains, and they're in modern-day Swaziland. They're actually right on the border. And here, 37,000 years ago, a remarkable object was invented. What you're seeing here are two different pictures. The first is the object as it looks, and the second is once you take a look at the notches that have been etched into it. This is a baboon fibula with 29 notches etched into it. And as far as we know, this is the first ever tool for thinking. I'll explain the 29 notches. But as I do, remember that we're talking about a time in human development where we were still sharing the planet with the Neanderthal, where humans were really in a precarious situation. It was an ice age. In other words, times were tough, and humans were victims to all sorts of natural hazards that they no longer are. So here's our 29 notches, and the 29 notches almost certainly correspond to the phases of the moon. So the Lubombo bone is the first tool for thought, and it's the first time that humans found a way to create a mechanism to try and impose order on a very wild and disordered world. It's possible, there is a theory, that actually this tool was invented by a woman to track her fertility. So really interesting idea. Now that's quite some time ago. Let's jump forward to the 1960s and the ideas of the packet switch network. Paul Baran, who comes up with that idea, finds the network as a central hub and spoke structure, and he gives us the means to create what becomes the internet. He gives us this centrifugal networked system of communications while he's working at the Rand Corporation. So he writes those pivotal documents in '62. But by 1968, he has seen what is about to come. He was a far-sighted person. And so he writes this paper, in fact, it's a speech he gives, on the future computer era, a little caution in the haste to number. Now, I was going to steal that title for us this morning, but you get the idea. A little caution in the haste to number. And in this document, which you can get free on rand.org, along with all of Paul Baran's papers, he describes a few problems in what happens when humans have too ready access to data technology. They move to a point where they rely on filing and stop thinking. I suspect that's what most people in the room think is a destination, that there's some combination of thought and of filing. But I think there's a hazard there. Amazingly, on the first page, he shares us a footnote. He's described all the problems of humans stopping to think about the implications of what they do with the early stages of big data. And in this footnote, he talks about his parents and how the premiums for their neighborhood started to go up as the demographics of that neighborhood changed. So he's talking about the human cost of inhuman decision-making. Now, we've known about this. This has been said to us by the guy who started changing our world back in the early 60s. And yet it still happens that there are inhuman costs to filing rather than thinking. So I want to introduce you to a lady called Tanya Sweeney. Tanya Sweeney is a professor of government at the Harvard School of Government. She's a serious person. You would not imagine her as being someone involved in crime unless you were absolutely a racist, which it turns out that some of our corporations may accidentally end up being. Because when she Googled her name, she wrote about this in 2013. When she Googled her name, she found out that all of the top sponsored search results produced by algorithms were to check her arrest record and her full background and credit. Right, so there's a question about algorithms and how inhumanly they might discriminate. So the big lesson for me the thing that I'm worried about is that data done wrong is a trap. It's a trap. Data done right is a totally different thing. But if we don't think about it, we will land ourselves in a situation where we have data done wrong by default. And part of this, I think, is because we believe in the authority of correlation. And I'm not sure that correlation always has authority. This is going to seem obvious. But, for example, there's a wonderful book by Tyler Vision with these kind of charts. This is one of my favorites. Very strong correlation between the number of films Nick Cage has appeared in per year and the number of swimming pool drownings. I prefer the one about cheese consumption and the number of people who die by becoming entangled in their own bed sheets. And by the way, just so you understand the scale, the numbers are small. This rates from 200 a year to 800 a year. So be cautious, not just about big data, but be cautious about bed sheets as well. This is all bad news. No surprise that the per capita consumption of margarine is correlated with the divorce rate in Maine. Maybe there's something to be said for that, I don't know. But part of the problem is that social scientists, I think, suffer from physics envy. They want this stuff. Now, my background is, I'm a historian, but I did my PhD doing all this mumbo jumbo, looking at terrorist memes on the internet. It was all nonsense, but I got a PhD for it. Back when I was doing history, things were much simpler because it was human stuff in human terms. And there's a question about how we regard this kind of thing with authority. And I don't think it's really the fault of the social scientists. I think it's a problem with humans, and it goes back to Plato. So in 380 BC, I made that mistake recently, in 380 BC, Plato writes in the Republic about what he calls the Spindle of Necessity. This is a line that goes through the universe. The universe, by the way, is the Earth surrounded by 5 bodies and a sun. So it's a small universe back then. And because all this is happening in the heavens, Plato says the geometry is perfect. Perfect, by the way, in the heavenly sense. Perfect circles. Everything is perfect. So he has 2 students, Eudoxus and Aristotle. And for the next 50 years, these guys struggle manfully to try and keep the circle perfect and Earth at the center and make the heavenly bodies move as they actually do in the night sky. Mission impossible. Well, actually, mission improbable. Because for the next 2,000 years, from 380 BC until Copernicus comes along in the middle of the 16th century, we all buy this. We keep iterating it and making it better. Now, look at the number of circles that are involved, each circle being perfect. But as the model gets more and more complex, by the time we get to Ptolemy, you have this system of interchanging circles, spinning in all sorts of different ways. And they manage to create a predictive model where the planet will be tomorrow in the night sky, where the tables in Ptolemy's, I can't remember the name of the document, Almagest, where the tables in Almagest say it will be. So they create a predictive model based on the assumption that the Earth does not spin, that the Earth is at the center of the universe, and there's a few other crazy assumptions in there as well, that orbits are perfectly circular. Madness. And yet, as a data scientist, I think this is something that one could buy into. By the time Copernicus publishes this on his deathbed, people rightly ask him, how come if I throw a... So if we're on Terra out here, not in the middle of the universe, right? If we're on Terra out here, not in the middle of the universe, how come when I throw up something, it lands at my feet? Sorry, I've done something to my microphone. How come when I throw up something, it lands perfectly at my feet? How come it doesn't spin off the side of this spinning globe? What's going on? Copernicus didn't have an answer, and we weren't going to get an answer until Newton. And the lesson for me that says is, the data model is so credible that when you actually come up with the right answer based on better assumptions, you might actually not be able to prove that, right? So data works better than the truth in this particular case. And just in case this seems like, I've come up with this crazy example from ancient history, this is happening all around us on really big stuff right now. Is anyone familiar with this document, Growth in a Time of Debt? Okay, well, it has determined an awful lot of our fates. Whatever country you're from, this document made a big impact on you. It was written in 2010 by 2 important people. This is Ken Rogoff. He is a Harvard professor. He's also chief economist at the IMF. And Carmen Reinhardt, who's also a professor at Harvard. These are serious, influential people. And what they wrote in this document is that based on their study of 20 nations, you could have austerity policies and growth. You could have your cake and you could eat it. This document was cited in the US presidential election in 2012. It was cited by the European Commission. It moved policies and it justified austerity. Entirely, by the way, without malice. I don't think that they made the following mistakes on purpose. However, a young student, Thomas Herndon, was tasked by his professor to find any paper, his other classmates found other papers, to find any authoritative paper and try and reproduce the maths. So Herndon tries to reproduce the maths in this really key paper. And what does he find out? There's a problem. He can't reproduce the maths. He thinks he's messed up. He goes to his professors. The professors eventually get the Excel sheet from Rogoff and Reinhardt, and what do they find? They find that 5 of those 20 countries have been left out. And the difference, just ignore this middle blue bar, this is what the first draft had, and this is the corrections from a postgraduate student. Nations decided the fate of millions of people based on this error. And this, I suspect, is happening all around us. And we believe in the authority of correlations and the authority of data assumptions because when you show a chart, it's much more credible than when you don't. I've played that game myself. On to a few other problems. Privacy. If you take a look at ad blocking, right, this is the global rate of ad blocking. This is a chart from a company I work for called PageFair, one of the things that I do. The number of people who are now blocking ads, all ads online, installing little add-ons to their browser, has reached 200 million. That's monthly active users. The cost, we estimated, is 21.8 billion to the publishing industry per annum. Now, people are doing this not just because ads are annoying. One of the main reasons they gave us when we surveyed them is that they are worried that ads are tracking them, that the infrastructure of data tracking online is eating itself, that people are switching off from online advertising because they don't want to be tracked. That data-driven advertising has created a system that is eating itself. And what I wonder is, when you transpose those data fears into the physical world, what will happen? Maybe you're familiar with this. This is the Disney Magic Band. It was introduced last year. I think it cost actually upwards of maybe over $1 billion to produce. I'm not sure about that estimate, but it's a big figure. What this does is it takes Internet of Things to a safe, protected space, right? This is a space where you willingly hand over your privacy, because not only can you tap into attractions and so on, Disney can use this to make sure that you get through the queue quicker, that your food finds you when you've ordered on your phone, and that the various characters of Disney come up and do photo ops with your kids, and so on. In fact, you can take a trip from Orlando Airport without having to talk to a single person right into your hotel room. The wristband will take you all the way. So this is what happens when a data system in the physical world works. But what about the worst case scenario? This is ridiculous, right? This is an imaginative, ridiculous situation, but I'm going to introduce you to a conversation between a spoon and a pot of jam. There is a very real thing called demotics. Data in the home, it's going to be a big industry. So the spoon says, "Hello, spoon. We meet again." Spoon's pretty smart. He knows he's been here before, right? Jam jar isn't so smart. He says, "I'm a jam jar. I'm 70% full. This morning I was 80% full." He says this kind of nonsense to anyone who passes by. He's promiscuous in that sense. The jam jar says, "Excellent weather we're having. I make it 26 degrees. I'll tell the fridge to switch on the compressor a little early today so that we kept at the right temperature." So far, so good. It's all working great. The spoon says, "I seem to be regularly in close proximity with you, jam jar. I'm sure no one will mind if I inform VHI." Right? So what happens when your spoon, based on its proximity to a jam jar, can tell your health insurer that it's around the jam jar a little bit too much and it's carrying too much weight and so on? The example sounds ridiculous, but take a look at what the Article 29 Committee, this is the panel of all data protection supervisors in each jurisdiction of the EU states, take a look at what they said in October last year. What they said is, we're worried. We're worried about people being able to opt in and opt out in the physical world. It's not like the online world, and this stuff is real. So there's a problem. And there was always going to be a problem when we built a system where you could stick up a slide like this at a conference like this. Do you trust your spoon? Are you building a world in which there is a conspiracy against all people by all things? This is worrying. I'm not suggesting that this will happen. I'm saying we need to think about it. Okay, so the last disaster zone of many is in labor. There's been a lot of writing and talk about this recently. Is in labor. So think about the 19th century. Machine production started to displace artisan production. And so we get to the Luddites and, all of that ancient history. But in the 20th century, as we're now becoming very aware, we had a situation where machine production and automation started to displace the middle earner. And the idea of lights out, which was just an idea in the 70s and 80s, is now a real thing. So think about FANUC. It's a Japanese company that makes robots that make other things. FANUC's factory is now building robots with the lights off, as far as I understand. And this is really scary, because it's not just about building cars. Let me introduce you to the Kiva robot. This robot is built by a company called Quiet Logistics. What you're seeing, and I think it was acquired by Amazon in the last half decade, what you're seeing is a robot that it isn't involved in building, it's involved in distribution. So we're not just talking about lights off factories, we're talking about lights off warehouses. And we're getting to a point where automation will have such an impact on the labor force that I wonder what part of the market it won't have an impact on. There seems to be, as I look at it, an end-to-end situation here. Demand can, to some extent, be machine assessed, right? So the jam jar I mentioned can say it's low on jam. The fridge can say it's low on jam jars, and so on. The manufacturer is already hitting automation in a big way. The same goes for distribution. We all know about automated marketing, and the transaction and application of these things, there's no reason why we should not have an end-to-end lights-out system. So Martin Wolf in the FT wrote a fantastic piece about a year ago in response to an interesting book that came out around about then. And in the piece, he said, it was actually February this year, he said, we need to start thinking seriously about taxing robot production. Because if we don't start thinking about those kind of things, we're going to end up in a situation where all of the productivity that these things create leave us with nothing to do, but also no earnings. So from all this doom and gloom, let me give you a quick summary. The first one, remember Nick Cave and the bedsheet situation. Correlations are not gospel. No sensible person really would ever have thought that they were, but they can dangerously appear as though they are. The second thing is, I think the more and more we manage to squeeze more efficiency out of data, what will become scarce is trust. So if you don't have a trust strategy to go with your data strategy, you're probably in a bad place. The third was to fear the end-to-end labor disruption. This is real, it's already happening, and I don't think we have a sensible plan to address it. And fourth, if we don't think about the data future, we should fear some degree of entrapment. Paul Boran saw this back in 1968 when he wrote that piece. This is a real thing, and I think events like today, where you meet and discuss data, I think you need to be thinking about these things in the back of your mind. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Johnny.